fly-in, fly-outs. The company flew the workers in for 2 weeks of work, then flew them back out to civilization for a couple of weeks off. That change was necessary to find and keep workers. During Dad's time at Paraburdoo, it was the third mine in the Pilbara. Almost 20 years later, Channar was only the fifth. But by 2011, there were more than 30 mines in the Pilbara, most of which had been built since 2000. To staff that many sites, in addition to the proliferation of mines elsewhere in the country, companies had to find ways to make mining more appealing. That meant employing FIFOs and paying them among the best wages in Australia. Truck drivers and drill operators in the Pilbara region could earn as much as 200,000 Australian dollars a year. Sydney and Melbourne were all but drained of tradespeople as skilled labour headed to the mines. In some, these workers were servicing a boom without historical parallel. China's boom. A couple of decades ago, China was just the world's factory, with little relevance to the rest of the globe beyond its ability to churn out cheap sneakers. Then, large-scale urbanization generated unprecedented demand for resources, breathing life into the Pilbara and creating a bonanza for commodity exporting nations everywhere. Today, the Chinese economy is graduating to the next stage. A vibrant middle class is emerging, which promises to drive global growth for decades to come as potentially hundreds of millions of consumers develop tastes comparable to their counterparts in rich nations. Meanwhile, 30 years after the Australian government took a leap of faith by allowing the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, to make one of its first overseas investments, today there is so much Chinese investment flowing abroad that capitals from Canberra to Washington, D.C. to Berlin fret over the security implications. Yet city mayors and state governors in those same countries aggressively court Chinese companies in the hope that their investment will help reinvigorate local communities. And in developing countries, Chinese loans have made possible the construction of infrastructure vital to economic development, such as much-needed ports and roads, as well as less-needed sports stadiums and government offices, that wouldn't get built without China's money. For decades, the world has depended on the United States and Europe as twin engines of growth, a highly precarious state of affairs if both engines sputter at the same time, as was the case during the global financial crisis. With China forecast to overtake the United States as the world's biggest economy around 2030, China is finally emerging as a third engine. Yet as the world salivates at the prospect of China's economic ascendancy, it's China's economic weakness that should have us all worried. I had my first Chinese language lesson in 1998, when I was 9 years old, a few months after China finally signed the deal to develop the Channar mine. It was Dad's idea, but it was my long-suffering mother who was responsible for getting me to go to those lessons after school every Friday afternoon. I repeatedly explained to her in no uncertain terms that she was wasting her time and money. Nevertheless, not only did she prevail, but somehow I stuck with Chinese through primary school and then through high school. In hindsight, the 1990s were still the early days of China's boom. As late as 2003, Japan was still the main destination of Australian iron ore experts, whereas today more than 80% go to China. Nonetheless, when I was at high school, there was something seemingly inevitable about China's ascent, and something unambiguously good about it too. I still recall preparing for my high school graduation exams in 1996 and memorizing sentences that I could draw upon during the final tests. Learning Chinese will help me find a job. China's fast economic development is good for Australia. After high school, I went to Beijing to study Chinese for a year. Then I went back for another year of study a few years later. When I returned a third time, I stayed. In total, I've spent 13 years, a good chunk of my adult life, living in China, first as a student and then for a decade as a financial journalist.